Could we have the screen up now, Jim? Thank you. And can we just turn the projector off? Okay, so I'm going to take a seat again. And Joe, actually, and Edward. But before Philip and Karen depart, just thank you very much. That was really energising to see what we are doing and the reach we are developing as an organisation as we go back home into our community in Merton. So thank you very much. It really is fantastic. So one more round of applause, please. Thank you. So the next item is a stadium update. Before I start on that, and is that projector going to turn off, by the way? I think it might. Just double click it. Mark, are we all right with microphones and stuff? Are we all cool? Do you want me to hold that microphone from...
It should be all right now.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so we had a lengthy meeting on where we are on the stadium back in June, and we have a packed agenda tonight. So it's not going to be the detailed run-through of the stadium that we gave back in June. I'm going to give a brief update. We're going to answer some questions, and then we're going to go on to one specific formal piece of business to do with the stadium on which we need your approval. I have two willing accomplices here by my side for this agenda item. So you all know the club's chief executive, Joe Palmer, and Edward Leake is, as I hope you all know, the Dons Trust board member that we co-opted earlier this year to help us on financial matters. And boy, was that timely. And we have other members of the stadium committee. We have a committee, just so as you know, that meets weekly. It's me, it's Joe, it's Roger, it's Colin, it's Rob, it's Ed, it's Mick Buckley, it's Tom, who's our financial controller. Where is Tom? Tom was here. Tom's at the back, Tom Rawcliffe. And Joe Giordano, our project manager. So every Monday morning, the whole of the Monday morning is running through pretty much the same agenda on the stadium. It's the same questions every week, but the answer changes subtly every week as things go along. So we are really paying close attention. So just to give you a bit of an update, the design is complete. I mean, there's some, we're talking about various finishes of walls and stuff like that. But basically the design work is complete. At the last meeting back in June, I did say that there was a possibility that there was one aspect of the stadium design that we would consult members on, which was the arrangement of the semi-permanent stands around the north, east and south of the stadium. So as you know, we're building one permanent stand along the west and then a semi-permanent stands round, and we thought there were a couple of options to consult on, but actually once the costings came back, it was very, very abundant. There was only one option there, which is the bowl option. So there's no point consulting on something that is just financially a non-starter. So apologies, there won't be that consultation. For what it's worth, I think the bowl looks great, and we are actually working on a visual that we will publish that sort of shows the view from inside the north stand, and actually you get a great impression of what it'll look like. So that should be published fairly soon. On the planning, so as you know, we got planning permission a couple of years ago. Some of you may know that we applied for what's called a Section 73 amendment some months ago, and that was granted back in April, I think it was, both in relation to our development and the neighbouring residential development. There were some amendments. We didn't deliberately make a lot of noise about that because last Monday was the deadline for anyone wishing to apply for judicial review, and we didn't particularly want to bring their attention to that. So as far as we know, no appeal for judicial review was made. However, I keep on asking the question, how exactly and when will we know whether an application went in? And I hope to be able to tell you definitively this evening. I can't tell you definitively, but fingers crossed, as far as we know, there was no application for judicial review. The next step on the planning is that, and again, we deliberately haven't made a lot of noise about this while that process was underway, but there will be some minor amendments to be made to the planning permission. For instance, we've moved the West Stand a few feet away from the National Grid site. You know, it's not particularly controversial, but it needs to be done. So that will go in imminently, and those are minor amendments, but given their nature, those will be considered by officers, not by the planning committee. So, and that will happen very quickly, actually. So then there's construction, and the small matter of construction by our selected contractor, Buckingham Group Contractors Limited, who presented together with the design team KSS back in June. So although we haven't yet signed the main construction contract, we have been conducting work under letters of intent that would keep us on track even while we weren't yet ready to sign the main contract. So they have been working. The groundworks are basically complete, and some of you may have seen some images of what looked like a very bumpy site indeed, as it has now all been levelled, and you can kind of see where the pitch will be. The piling work for the West Stand is complete. They are laying steel beams, and we've ordered the steel work. And there's something called an attenuation tank for flooding, which will go under the pitch, and that's basically in place. So work is underway, and the next step will be to sign the main construction contract itself, and that will be imminently, hopefully. And timing is tight for next summer, but we will complete at or as close to the start of the season as possible. So then that brings us on to finance. So first of all, equity. As you know, we are raising equity through crowdfunding. So first of all, thank you to those of you who participated to date. Those of you who haven't participated to date, if you go on the website, you'll see a banner across the top of the website that you can click on, taking you to CEDA's page where you can register and subscribe. So if you haven't yet done that and want to do so, do please go to the website. And if you have already done so, thank you. There's nothing to stop you from subscribing for even more than you have already done. That probably won't be the last time this evening I make that statement. I make no apology. We said that the equity was conditional on two things. One was we got past a minimum amount of £2 million, and the second is signing the construction contract. So we are now past the minimum of £2 million. Some of you may have seen that. That's great. But just to avoid any confusion whatsoever, 2 million doesn't mean we've raised all the money we want to raise. We want to raise every penny we possibly can. We are allowed to raise £7 million, and we want you to help us get as close to that as we possibly can between now and the 4th of October, because the more equity we raise, the less debt we have to borrow. The less debt we have to borrow, the more comfortably we can service it and support a playing budget that makes sense. So please continue to support us. Then that brings us to the debt itself, which will and then we'll go into more about the borrowing under the next agenda item. But we're in discussion with a number of sources of debt. It's not firm yet, it's not ho-ho in the bank yet, but we have a number of irons in the fire. We hope to make that more concrete imminently. So that's the progress we've been making. We could take some questions on where we are before we go on then to the approval we're seeking in relation to increasing the amount we can borrow and I'll explain when we come to it why we're asking you for that permission. So, questions from the floor. Please tell us who you are, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Hi, Colin Shergold. Two questions. Firstly, let's say we raise 3 million. How much extra do we need to take in terms of a loan? So, what's what are we actually needing to raise altogether in terms of the crowdfunding and the loan? And secondly, you just said that obviously it's tight in terms of moving in next season. Worst comes to the worst, can we stay a bit longer here, or is that out of the question?
Okay, the first bit is we need to raise £13 million altogether. Now, there's a few tunes we can play on that, and you could say, well, let's take out this bit and that bit, but basically we need to raise £13 million altogether. So if we raise 3 million, we're seeking to raise, of equity, we'd seek to raise £10 million. Now, the numbers move around a bit because you pay interest on loans, you don't pay interest on equity, so give or take a few quid, but that's the basic idea. And that's a lot of money for this club to service, and we need to think about, so if we do have to raise £10 million of debt, we'll be thinking, we are pushing the business plan to the max to create additional revenue streams to service that over and above playing football. We have a socking great stadium with a conference and banqueting facility with space that is used, really good commercial space that is unused 6 days out of 7 or whatever it is that we will be seeking to monetize. But we will, we may have to look after the equity is closing, and once we've got that debt, how do we replace some of that debt over time, even with potentially more equity? So raising 10 million isn't comfortable, but if we only raise 3 million, that's what we need to do. So then the second bit of the question, was what would we do? So it is tight, but the contractors, and they sort of give you a contractual program, and then they explain how they're trying to bring in the end date as distinct from what they're contractually obliged to. And people might say, well, can these projects always overrun? I mean, one of the good things about the way we've done it is that the groundwork is basically done, and groundwork is often where a lot of things go wrong in construction schedules. So we have less uncertainty around that really nasty in the dirt front end stuff than some projects. But we will be looking at the right time at the options available to us. One of those options could be here, but there could be options elsewhere as well. We're going to have to play our cards a bit close to our chest on that, but we believe that our brethren in the football community will see us right for a few weeks, and also where will some initial matches of the season be at home or away, etc. So
I think there's also some other options, and I think one of the other options that we might look at as well is obviously to play a number of our first games away from home, and then possibly followed by actually just playing in the stadium, but only with the pitch and effectively the bowl completed, so not the internal parts of the stadium. So that's another option that we may look to when we get to that point.
But we're not at that point yet. We're going for it, right? We have another question over there from Ian Pollock. I've avoided the need for him to say his name.
Hello.
Yep.
Thank you. Just on this business of where the team may play if the new stadium isn't ready, is it the case that Chelsea have ruled out completely us staying here, and that we will have to move somewhere else for a short period of time if we can't move in at Plough Lane, or is staying here still an option for an extra few weeks or a couple of months or whatever?
It's not staying here is not something we haven't had that discussion with them yet. The reason being is that actually it may be kind of out of our hands, in the sense that if, for example, we sold 5,000 season tickets, we wouldn't be able to accommodate everyone here. So that's the bigger issue. But again, there are options. We could sell some of the season tickets and then partial ones for in the new stadium. So there are still options. We just haven't had that conversation about staying here at the moment, because we've still got quite a few other ones down the line, and everything, you know, we may be in here anyway. So I think in the next couple of months we'll have a much clearer picture of you know, what sort of course of action we'll need to take.
Hello, yeah, it's Kevin Field. So now the design's finalised, what are the specific capacities of each part of the ground?
Maybe while we take another question or two, I'll remind myself on my laptop somewhere. But essentially, it's about 9,346 or something altogether. And I'm going to have to remind myself what the split is between. Yeah, about half of that's the West Stand, and then what they will do is the rest of it will be a sort of bowl. So it'll be a continuous bowl all the way around of 11 rows. So just to put that in context, and I had this checked at 2 successive stadium committee meetings because I didn't believe it, but our existing stadium here is 8 rows, and I thought it was more, but it isn't. So 11 rows, if you can imagine all the way around the smaller bit as one continuous thing, actually the images of it look pretty damn good. But yeah, half is West Stand, and then I can't remember the exact split between the others.
John Dolan. There doesn't seem to be mention in the table in paper 2 of the money we're getting for the sale of this ground.
We didn't mention the total amount. Is that your question? Yep. So we didn't, because it is commercially.
Sorry, yeah, it's just that it seems to be a missing factor is the sum we're getting for this. You know, it's sort of got funds available, Merton Catalyst, funding required 13, and there's nothing that says, you know, there's some funds from the club to close the gap, as it were.
Yeah, so I think there is a figure in there of the funds that are available from. So it's going forward, right? And we have already spent some money on the stadium. So the amount that Chelsea are paying remains commercially confidential. That's part of the agreement with them. I suspect that in due course it will become apparent from financial accounts, but it's not yet. So by saying here's what's left of the project after what we are contributing from the Chelsea money. So no, it doesn't tell you how much is there, but that money is factored in because we've already spent some of it, if that makes sense.
Peter Godfrey. Regarding the lending we're going to have to, or the debt we're going to borrow, and you've talked about multiple potential lenders, how are we approaching them? Directly, or are we going to use a third party to do that?
So we have a we have a loan broker that we've been working with for quite some time, and some other introductions have been made too. So yeah, through a broker and through other contacts. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Trevor Campbell-Smith. I apologise if the answer has already been discussed, but you've referred to the sale of season tickets. Is the club considering selling debenture seats?
So I think it's fair to say that it wasn't part of our base case financial strategy, because you sort of rob Peter to pay Paul. I mean, it's, you know, you get the capital in up front, but then you detract from your operating income going forward. And it's the same question that has been asked about pretty much all of these meetings about stadium naming rights and whether that's a lump sum or an ongoing sum. So our base case remains just season tickets and a loan, but we will continue to optimise such matters.
Barry Scott. I just wondered, in the construction contract, do we have any penalties if they don't achieve a certain date, whether it be 4 weeks after the assumed date?
So yes, there are what's called liquidated ascertained damages, and I think I can remember the amount, but I'm not going to disclose it. But there is, I mean, there's always, so a contractor can apply for an extension of time, as I suspect you know, Barry, for certain reasons such as force majeure, etc., etc. So, but they are a way, you can't necessarily bank on the fact that you're going to receive this money. You can certainly bank on the fact that you're keeping the contractor's feet to the fire by virtue of that. So yes, there are penalties.
Colin Shergold again. One of my slight concerns with the original planning was that the away end, I believe, only held about 1,200. Now, if we take worst case scenario, and let's say we're in League Two or whatever, and we get big opposition, I was concerned that we couldn't have more away fans there, so we're playing like a Portsmouth. And somebody did tell me that we wouldn't almost be allowed because the away fans are coming in from the north side and all the home fans come in from the south side, if you like. So now that we've got a bowl, have we got a decision to make how far north we can sell season tickets? Because if we play like a Portsmouth, we might want to go quite a long way south with the away section, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. So it's quite flexible in that north stand. So we've got a number of different segregation points. So we've probably got about 3 in there at the moment, which means that we can scale it down or scale it up as we need to and still be, compliant from a safety point of view, and get the people in that we need to. So it may be a case that we need to review expanding it a little bit more onto the east stand, but actually I think we're fairly comfortable with the 3 seg points that we've got on there at the moment, which should be ample. I can't remember the exact number at the moment, but it's a good number.
Okay, are there any more, or shall we move on to the borrowing issue? Okay, well, if people, if you have some burning question a bit later, then we'll answer it later. So this is the only formal piece of business to be decided tonight. But some months ago, or actually probably even a couple of years ago, we came to you for approval to borrow up to £7 million in connection with this project. And as you've heard, we need to raise £13 million of debt and equity. If so, to take Colin's case, of 3 million, if we get to 3 million on the equity, then we'd need to borrow 10 million. So we need to come to you for approval. So a few things to say about this. The first thing is, actually, we want the Dons Trust to approve it, so that there will then be a separate approval process of AFCW PLC to get that approved. So there may be an extraordinary general meeting of that company at some stage. That will be held at, sometime in the future when we know precisely what the wordsmithing on the resolution is. But actually, it's getting this approval from the floor tonight that will give us the power we need to go and do that. The second thing is, as I explained earlier, actually what I'd really like is for you all to go home, log on to the Casitas and give us £7 million, and then we'll go and borrow £6 million, and we'll all sleep much better in bed at night. But there is just a chance that you won't accomplish that by this time tomorrow. So therefore, we consider it prudent to seek your permission to borrow more. If we do borrow more, as I say, that doesn't necessarily mean that will form part of the permanent borrowings of the club, because there are a couple of permutations of loans we're looking at, and one is you go, and this isn't uncommon in real estate financing actually, that you go and get a development phase loan, and then you refinance it at completion with some long-term debt. So that's one approach. And then another approach is you get a sort of long-term mortgage-style loan from day one. And we're sort of parallel tracking both those approaches. But for instance, if we took the former approach, then actually part of the refinancing plan for that at completion might be to keep trying to raise some equity, not necessarily through the crowdfunding, but still within the 75% authorisation that you gave us late last year. So we don't want to borrow more than £7 million. You can help us not borrow more than £7 million. I might have mentioned it in the past, but it's still not too late to increase your subscription. I might mention that later. And even if we do borrow more than £7 million, we won't necessarily retain more than £7 million, into the long-term financing plan, depending on what we can do in the interim. But if we're to proceed with this project, we need that option in our back pocket, and who knows how much of it will come into our front pocket. So that's why we're seeking that permission from you. And this being the last SGM before the AGM, we thought we'd do that tonight rather than call a special one closer to the time of borrowing money. So that's the proposal. Are there any questions about that? We've got one here and one over there. So can you wait for the microphone?
So if my maths is correct, then you're asking for permission to borrow 11 million. Is that correct? As we stand
Up to 11 million, yeah.
And that's it. I mean, we're assuming that we're going to get more, but you're going to ask formally for 11 million.
Up to 11 million of borrowings, yeah. When you say we're going to get more, we need 13 million pounds, but the debt equity isn't included in that borrowing, obviously. So, yeah.
Okay, so that will be the formal question, up to 11 million.
Yes, yeah. I'll read out the formal question actually before we vote on it, but yes. And I think Ian and then Peter. Oh.
Jeff Seal. Firstly, does the amount we borrow affect the interest rate we pay? i.e., is borrowing 10 million more expensive at interest rate than borrowing 5 million? And secondly, have we considered doing something like the Don's bond to raise some small portion of it?
So, do you want to
go? On the first part, yes. It's not an exact relationship, but the more you borrow and the shorter term you borrow, likely the higher the interest rate will be, which is one of the reasons why we're looking to raise as much equity as we possibly can. And the Don's bond, at the moment, no, really, because we don't want to distract from the crowdfunding. The crowdfunding is the main vehicle for fans and for members of the Don's Trust to be able to invest in the club at the moment.
One thing I'd just add to that, which is that, so I have a Don's Trust bond, and I'm going to ask the club whether I can swap it into equity. So if you hold a Don's Trust bond, I mean, we're thinking about whether we can formally make that offer to people, but if people say, look, rather than repay me my Don's Trust bond, can I swap it into equity? The effect of that is to reduce the overall indebtedness of the club and therefore enhance our debt service capacity. So holders of those bonds might want to think about that.
Peter Godfrey again. With reference to my previous question, the broker that's going out to raise the if you like, the finance, when he's approaching people, what's his pitch? Is he securing the finance on the basis of the value of the ground, future season ticket or ticket sales, or the club revenue, etc.?
So I would say this is essentially a real estate financing in the sense that it is secured against a stadium, it's a stadium with planning permission as a stadium. So to the extent that a lender enforced that security, they would either have to find another use for it as a stadium, or somebody who took it off their hands would have to re-permission it for other purposes, which is highly uncertain. So it's a stadium financing, but one in which clearly they care about the ability of the occupier to service the debt. So we have a very elaborate business plan, financial model that we have provided to them, that they are looking through, that they have asked us questions about the commercial revenues, etc., etc., etc. Ian.
Cheers. What would be the interest rate we'd have to pay if we borrowed, say, £10 million?
So that remains under negotiation or to be negotiated. I'm not going to say in this room now. And it will also vary. I mean, I think one of the crucial differences will be, do you remember I talked about a development finance loan versus a term loan? So broadly speaking, when you do a development loan, it's quite expensive money, but then you refinance at the end of it once you've got an established, you've got over the construction phase and the attendant risks, and you've established a business plan in a new stadium, and you then refinance more cheaply, versus a term loan, which kind of is an all-in rate that reflects the all-in, risk profile over the term. So those might have quite different interest rates potentially, depending on which of those. I don't want to go into the details of that in this room, I'm afraid.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't say my name last time. Andy Ramsden. When you talked about the bonds, forgive my lack of knowledge or detail, but you mentioned the bonds. Was this the original investment that we were all asked to raise when we started the club? Is that the bond? Or?
So the Dons Trust bond is, it's about 2004, I'm guessing. Eric might remember better, but around about then. That it was basically loans that individual Dons Trust members made to the trust. So we've got, Tom actually asked, Tom, I said £250,000 earlier outstanding, but you thought it was a bit north of that, is that right? Yeah, so it's not huge amounts outstanding, but we've still got that.
But what was it we were asked to invest in? And a lot of us put our hands in our pocket at the beginning.
Okay, so there were two things. In 2003, when we bought this place,
yes,
we did a share issue. We set up a company called AFCW PLC, which issued shares. And actually the share issue we're doing at the moment, when you subscribe via Cedars, it's exactly the same investment. It's the same shares in that company. But we also invited trust members to lend us some money on soft terms, and we still have some of it, not huge amounts, but some of that £250,000 outstanding. Okay, is there more on that, or can I remind you what the resolution is and get you to vote on it? Okay, I take that as an invitation. So the resolution is to authorise the Dons Trust Board to cast the trust votes in AFCW plc in favour of a special resolution that may be sought by AFCW plc to increase the amount of borrowings permitted for the new stadium to £11 million. Could everyone who's in favour of that resolution put their hands in the air? Can everyone who's against put their hands in the air? I think that's no one, so that is overwhelmingly, unanimously carried. Any abstentions? No? Great. Thank you very much indeed. So, what we're going to do... Sorry?
The proxies don't overwrite them, do they?
So, as a matter of information, not that they count because it's a show of hands on the floor, but there were 20 proxies in favour, 7 at the proxies' discretion, 3 against, and 2 were either spoilt or unreadable. Would the 2 whose proxies were unreadable kindly come and make themselves known to the secretary during the interval?